What's up everybody, Nate here. Our economy has gone through some pretty crazy changes over the last 2 years, from a booming economy to a pandemic, and then a recession, all the way to stock market crashes and then hitting new record highs. And of course, who could forget Dogecoin being the top currency in the world? Alright, that last one might have been a lie. But overall, everything has been changing in the United States for a while now. But nothing has changed more than our labor force and jobs market. And over the last 6 months, we have seen some of the biggest shifts in our job market in American history, with around 8 to 9 million people quitting their jobs voluntarily. It's been dubbed the Great Resignation, but the Great Resignation is actually getting worse. There is a new movement in our economy right now being dubbed the anti-work movement. So you have millions of people quitting their jobs, and instead of going out and finding a new one, they're actually just done with work altogether. And this movement is hitting our economy big time because you have millions of Americans who don't want to work. And for a lot of them, it's not because they're lazy, it's because they don't want to work in today's corporate and economic structure. And if you think it's just a small group, you're wrong. There are millions of Americans all throughout the United States right now that are refusing to work until things change in our economy. And this movement is only growing. So today I want to talk all about this anti-work movement, how that is affecting our economy right now, and what it's going to mean for our economy, culture, and country in the future. But before I break all of this down, do me a quick favor and smash, hit, or destroy that thumbs up button below, and ring that little notification bell too. Both of those two things are completely free, and they show me that you like this video and that you want to see even more just like it. Thank you so much for doing that. Now let's talk all about this anti-work movement. So you have millions of Americans right now quitting their jobs for 3 major reasons. They believe that they are underpaid, overworked, and that the working conditions in our country right now don't really work for the average American. And recently, this anti-work movement has gone viral. There's even a massive Reddit community behind the movement. In fact, one of the key members of that Reddit community actually went on Fox News to do an interview and talk about this anti-work movement. Well, that interview kind of went viral, and now the Reddit community has been taken private. And this is something that we've been seeing over the last 10 years or so. That's right, this anti-work movement didn't happen overnight. It's been growing bigger and bigger in certain places online, and now it's started to explode. Over the past 10 years or so, we've seen labor participation start to drop in the United States. Now, labor participation and our unemployment rate are kind of two different things. Our unemployment rate just shows the amount of people who lost their jobs in a particular period. Now, our labor participation rate shows how many people in the United States are able to work but just don't want to. And it's gone from around 68%, which was an all-time high, all the way down to 63%. And a lot of experts agree that the pandemic really sparked a lot of our labor force issues that we're facing today. When the pandemic first started, Americans were out of work for a long time, and a lot of Americans relied on government stimulus or paycheck protection loans. And that's because we have a system in the United States that can't function if people aren't spending money. If there's no money in circulation, well, that's bad for the US economy, because that means businesses can't grow, and if businesses have no money, then they can't pay their people either. So it's sort of all around bad, and that's exactly what happened when the pandemic first started. Now that kind of went away after a few months. And by this point, pretty much all businesses are back to normal. However, it was the time frame between when things really closed and back to normal today where we had our issues. Some people in some professions had to stay at their job, and they were deemed essential workers. These essential workers were basically any employee that was working on the day-to-day operations for a company. And unfortunately, they also happen to be the lowest earners. And for a lot of businesses, it was hard work and it was really long work. Like, these essential workers were putting in a ton of time and a ton of effort at a job that they were not being paid that well in. Like, take a look at these graphs. This graph shows the connection between hours of work and real wages in the United States. Now you can see that the majority of workers are putting in over 40 hours a week, but they're actually making under $25 an hour. In addition, this chart actually breaks down what fields people are working in and how many hours people typically work in those fields. For the vast majority of occupations on this list, roughly 20% or more people are actually working over 40 hours every single week. But the problem is the wages aren't really going up even though they're working more. So a good portion of Americans are actually working over 40 hours a week but are being paid less money. And that brings us to reason number 1 why we have millions of Americans quitting their jobs right now. they're underpaid. The problem is the majority of Americans are not making more money every single year. In fact, in December 2021, real wages for Americans actually decreased by around 2.4%. This means that even though Americans that were employed were getting raises, they were still losing money because the price of everything went up. And we know the price of everything went up because of inflation. During that same time period, inflation was around 7%. That's the highest we've seen in around 40 years. So ultimately, that's a big deal. Americans don't want to make less money and have inflation be way too high, so that way they can't afford anything anyway. Now, on February 3rd, 2022, weekly jobless claim numbers were reported, and they were actually the lowest that we've seen in a very long time. They came in at around 238,000. That actually comes after a couple weeks of them going up in 2021. And in January 2022, jobless claims hit nearly 300,000, the most we have seen since October 2021. That means that your unemployment rate is slightly starting to grow in the United States, but how does that kind of relate to this anti-work movement? Well, so the whole anti-work movement is basically a statement against how our economy and our corporate structure works right now in the United States. Basically, workers are changing their ideology about the work that they do. So the job that you did or the career that you had to have value behind it. If that career or job brings in a lot of value for a company, well, then you're going to get paid a lot more. However, if it's unskilled and not valuable, then you're going to be a low-wage worker. This movement is kind of flipping that, because instead of talking about the value that you bring in, it's all about time and the position that you have. So think of it this way. If you're a cashier and you work 8 hours a day and you make $12 an hour, for this movement, you're basically selling an hour of your time for $12, which means the company that you work for is buying or renting you for an hour, or 8 hours, or for however long that you work. But this movement says that you shouldn't have to sell yourself to a job for a specific amount of time every day. That's not how our employment structure should work. Nobody should be able to tell you exactly what to do for a specific period of time and then pay you for it. You should be able to work however you want to. And you shouldn't have to sell your time or yourself in order to make money. That's what the anti-work movement is all about. Making money on your own terms, so it's not really work that you're doing. They seek to break kind of the traditional norms in the job. So when I was growing up, it was all about having a job so that you could have more things. If you didn't have a good paying job, well, then you weren't going to be able to buy anything or do anything in society. Anti-work movement is completely opposite. You shouldn't have to have a job in order to be able to do the things that you want to. Obviously, that is not how our economy works right now. So you've seen millions of people quit in protest of our current economic structure. But that brings us back to employment and the jobless claims numbers. So we started to see at the end of December 2021 into January 2022, jobless claim numbers actually start going up. Now, a lot of people believe that was because of the Omicron variant, basically part 17 of our pandemic. And that might be true. As the pandemic gets a little bit stronger, jobs are going to be constricted all throughout the country. Very similar to what we saw back in March of 2020. But an alternative to that is that people were actually just getting fired. I mean, that's really the only way to claim unemployment insurance. You have to be fired, and then your employer and your state actually pay you benefits for a specific period of time. If you quit your job, then you don't necessarily get a lot of those benefits. Well, people had started to realize that after millions of people quit in August and November of 2021. But now people are just letting their employers fire them and then collecting some of the benefits. That is a way to protest their employers, because now they're getting paid and they're not even doing anything. Their company is still paying them and they're not working. So that's number one, but number two is all about bad working conditions. Employees during the pandemic worked a ton, especially the essential workers, and when the pandemic started to go away a little bit, they were not given anything back in return. And unfortunately, that's really not new to this day and age. That has been going on for a long time. Workers felt betrayed. They felt betrayed by their companies and society because everybody told them that they were so important for so long. Well, now that the pandemic is gone, nothing has really changed, and neither has their pay. They weren't given the recognition that they deserved, so they're just quitting, or like I said before, they're just not doing their job to the point to where they get fired. Now, what exactly is all of this doing to our economy right now? Well, in the short term, this is contributing to inflation a lot. Like I said, inflation was 7% in December 2021. And that means the average price of everything in our economy is going up by around 7%. You're gonna have some things that go up a lot higher than 7% and some things that are lower than that, but on average it's 7. Americans are paying more for all of the same things, and that's sending rippling damage throughout our entire economy. Because our labor market right now is so fragile, companies aren't able to produce enough in order to meet demand. Now, that's just one part of our inflation issue. Other parts are money printing, the Federal Reserve, and of course, the pandemic. But right now, inflation is so high that it's hurting what the Federal Reserve can do about our inflation issues. They can basically raise or lower demand based on their monetary policies. Like back in 2020, they lowered their benchmark interest rates all the way down to 0%. This meant that millions of Americans had way more access to money. Now they're talking about raising their benchmark interest rates because our nation is starting to recover from the pandemic. Raising rates means that demand will go down because people won't be able to get a loan or spend money as easily. But they can't do that if labor participation and unemployment is high, because they can't start constricting our economy if nobody has any money anyway. Unemployment actually went up slightly from December 2021 to January 2022. It sits at 4% right now. That's still pretty low, but labor participation is actually continuing to drop. Ultimately, what that means is fewer people having less money in our economy, because if people aren't working, then they can't get a paycheck. And it also means that the United States federal government and Federal Reserve is going to continue to print more money for unemployment insurance. That means the cost of things is most likely going to continue to go up in 2022. But it also means that our job market is shifting in terms of who has the power in the business relationship. It's all on the employees right now. Employers are struggling to find people to fill positions, because if employers don't meet the specifications that employees have, then they're just not going to take that job, which means our labor market is super competitive right now. They in turn have to raise wages even more, which just contributes to inflation. And they have to give out more benefits and provide better working conditions, which means the cost for employers is going up. Now, I will say the cost for employers should have been that high anyway. I mean, you have to treat your employees right, or else they're going to quit for a new job. I think right now, employers have been putting off doing a lot of these things year after year, and it's just now suddenly starting to hit them. The problem is, it's just affecting all of us, and ultimately, these big businesses are not the ones that are going to take the fall. I mean, we've seen it in the past, from the stock market to big businesses. When these massive corporations start to fail, the United States federal government tends to bail them out. That means jumping in and saving these bad companies that have bad business practices when they really shouldn't be saved at all. For the most part, they're toxic companies. That's why their employees were leaving. Now, that's not always the case, but in a lot of cases in 2021 and now 2022, that's what's going on here. You can't ask employees to work 40, 50, and even 60 plus hours every single week and not give them any recognition or pay increases. And with all that being said, what is this going to mean for our economy in the future? I mean, are we just gonna have millions of people all the time who just refuse to work? Well, the anti-work movement has a big flashy title behind it, but really all it's about is putting the labor power into the workers' hands instead of the employers. Workers should be able to create their own destiny and then get paid based on that destiny, rather than employers basically setting a price for a specific position. Because right now, the way our job system works is all about supply and demand. If somebody's willing to do a job at a specific pay rate, well, then that job exists. That's basically why we have the minimum wage right now. However, when you take out that minimum wage or you start to raise it up, well, then businesses can't afford that anymore, and basically a job disappears. But the argument here is that we shouldn't have ownership in companies, and this gets pretty complex. So they're not saying that we shouldn't have stores and restaurants and that people shouldn't work in them. They're saying the exact opposite. People should be able to work in those jobs, but instead of them being owned by a group or shareholders, they're actually owned by the employees. That way the employees take home all of the profits from those businesses. So they're no longer selling their time to somebody else. Everything that they do is all for them. And that means any amount of value that they bring in at a location, they get to see the returns from that value. Not only that, but it's about doing things that you love instead of jobs that you hate. For instance, if somebody wants to walk a dog as a profession, they should be able to do that, at least by the standards of the anti-work movement. You should be able to center a career around anything. And for the future of our economy, that could be a good thing. I mean, having entrepreneurs and having new ideas is a great thing. That means we're gonna have a lot more leaders and business-minded individuals rather than people who are just looking for a paycheck at the end of the day. And to be honest with you, some people just have better skills. Like, not everybody is cut out to be a business owner. Some people are better in certain tasks, and that's not a bad thing. But the problem is those jobs that sometimes people love, they just don't pay anything. So why would anybody want to do them? This could eventually change the way our economy is structured in general, because now you're only going to have jobs and positions that people want to do, and the pay is supported by that. I mean, right now, the Great Resignation has meant that around 8 to 9 million people have quit their jobs, but that could continue to grow as more and more people become fed up with the companies that they work for. And right now, people are basically living off of unemployment and stimulus from the last 2 years. Continuing claims for unemployment insurance have been around 1.5 million for the past few weeks. They are beginning to drop in the United States, but they're staying pretty steady around the 1.7 to 1.5 million mark. So a lot of people are getting paid to do nothing. And in 2020, with extra unemployment insurance, people were sometimes making more through stimulus and unemployment than they were at their jobs. So why would anybody want to go out and work a job if they're still making money? But like I said, this is not going away overnight. You're most likely going to continue to see millions of people quit their jobs en masse. But the fact of the matter is, the United States economy cannot survive unless people spend money. So if you have a workforce that is basically refusing to work, then what do? Well, normally it's never been large enough for the United States to step in, other than certain periods like the Great Depression. But if this movement continues to get bigger and you see more and more people quitting their jobs or getting fired, well, the United States government will have no choice but to step in and start providing stimulus or new forms of income, like universal basic income. That just means the United States government gives everybody in the country a certain amount of income every month or every week that you can use however you want to. Something like that might become a reality if nobody is working, because we have to have spending in our economy. People aren't spending money. That's worse for the government, because now all of our infrastructure and businesses are struggling and starting to crumble. So the power is in the people here. And we could start seeing some pretty massive changes to our society over the next few years. But now I want to hear what you think about this issue. What are your thoughts on the anti-work movement? How do you feel about the power being put into workers' hands rather than employers? Do you think that the anti-work movement and what it stands for is a great thing for our country and economy? Or do you think it'll eventually lead us into the next depression? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for me, everybody. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, be sure to hit that subscribe button below. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.